The key turning in the lock used to be the sound of comfort, the signal that her world was complete. But on a rainy Tuesday in October, it became the sound of a life being torn apart. For Sophie, 8 months pregnant and humming a lullaby in a nursery, she'd painted sunshine yellow. That sound marked the end of everything she knew. Her husband Ethan didn't just walk out the door. He bulldozed their shared future for a life with another woman, leaving Sophie with nothing but a mountain of debt and a child he no longer wanted. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's the story of a woman left in the rubble who decided not to cry, but to build an empire from the dust. The air in the small apartment on Elm Street was thick with the scent of fresh paint and impending joy. Sophie stood in the doorway of what would soon be the nursery, one hand resting protectively on the taut globe of her stomach, the other holding a damp cloth. The walls were a cheerful shade of yellow, the color of daffodils and new beginnings. A half-assembled white crib stood in the corner, its instruction manual spread on the floor like a sacred text. For the past 3 weeks, this room had been her sanctuary, a physical manifestation of the love she felt for the tiny life growing inside her, and for the man she shared that life with. Ethan, her husband. He was late tonight, but that wasn't unusual. As a senior associate at the prestigious architectural firm, Sterling and Finch, long hours were the norm. They were the price they paid for this life. The cozy apartment, the dinners out, the future that shimmered so brightly on the horizon. A future that included their son, whom they'd already decided to name Leo. Sophie smiled, tracing the outline of a tiny, fluffy cloud she had just painted above the crib. Leo's little sky. The familiar sound of the key in the front door lock finally broke her reverie. "Ethan, you're home," she called out, her voice warm with relief. "I was just finishing the clouds. You have to see them." She walked out of the nursery, wiping her hands on her jeans, her smile ready. But it faltered the moment she saw him. He stood in the entryway, his expensive trench coat dripping rainwater onto the welcome mat. His face, usually so open and expressive, was a closed, hard mask. He wasn't looking at her, but rather through her, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance. He held his leather briefcase in one hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. "Ethan, is everything okay at work?" she asked, her heart beginning a slow, nervous thud against her ribs. He finally met her eyes, and the coldness in them was a physical blow. This wasn't the man who had whispered dreams to her in the dark, who had gently kissed her swollen belly that very morning. This was a stranger. "We need to talk, Sophie," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He didn't move to take off his coat. He didn't move to kiss her. "Okay," she said, slowly, her hand instinctively going back to her stomach. "Let me just get you a towel." "Don't." He snapped the word sharp enough to make her flinch. "Just sit down." He gestured towards the living room sofa, the one they had picked out together, arguing playfully over fabric swatches. She moved towards it, as if in a daze, every instinct screaming that her world was about to tilt off its axis. He remained standing, a prosecuting attorney before a defendant. "I'm not happy, Sophie." He began the words clinical and rehearsed. "I haven't been for a long time." Sophie stared at him, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" We were just planning the baby shower last week. You were so excited." A flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed his face. I was trying to make it work for the sake of the situation." "The situation," She repeated the word, tasting like poison. You mean our baby? Our son. It's not that simple, he said, pacing now, the motion agitated. There's someone else. The 3 words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Sophie felt like she'd been plunged into ice water. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The yellow nursery, the half-built crib, the scent of paint. It all seemed to belong to a different life, a different woman. Who? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Her name is Vanessa, he said, and the way he said the name with a sort of reverence was another knife in her heart. She's a new partner at the firm, a client from the Langford development. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. 6 months. The timeline crashed through her mind. 6 months ago, they were celebrating their 2nd anniversary. 6 months ago, they were joyfully trying to conceive. He was with this Vanessa while he held her, while they planned their family, while he told her he loved her. The nausea that rose in her throat had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She understands me, Sophie. Ethan continued, his voice gaining a self-righteous conviction. She sees my ambition. We connect on a level you and I just don't anymore. A level I don't. Sophie found her voice a tremor of fury running through it. I gave up my career as a graphic designer to support yours. I moved to this city for you. I am carrying your child, Ethan. What level of connection is deeper than that? It's not about that, he said, waving a dismissive hand. It's about intellectual synergy, about a shared vision for the future. Vanessa and I are going to be a power couple. We're closing a multi-million-dollar deal in Monaco next month. He spoke of Monaco and power couples while she stood in their 2-bedroom apartment covered in paint, her body heavy with his child. The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking. So what happens now? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. You just walk out. I've already put a deposit down on a new condo with Vanessa. In the Zenith Tower, he said, naming one of the most exclusive buildings in the city. My things are being picked up tomorrow. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the arrangements. The finality of it was absolute. There was no discussion, no remorse. It was a business transaction, a life, a marriage, a family being liquidated. The arrangements? She echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You can't be serious. Ethan, look at me. I'm 8 months pregnant with your child. You can't just leave. This is the part I knew you wouldn't understand. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. The baby complicates things, I admit. But it doesn't change the fundamental truth. I'm in love with Vanessa. Being here with you would be a lie, and I won't live a lie. So you lied for 6 months instead. She shot back, her grief momentarily eclipsed by a white-hot rage. He had the decency to look away. I wanted to find the right time. The right time. When Ethan, after our son is born. Were you going to wait until I was in labor to tell me you had a new family? He didn't answer. He just walked over to the desk in the corner and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled something, quickly tore out the check, and placed it on the coffee table. This should cover you for a few months, he said, his tone that of a man settling a bill. To get on your feet. Sophie looked at the piece of paper. It felt like the ultimate insult. He thought he could buy his way out of his vows, his responsibilities, his own child. She stood up, her body trembling, and walked over to the table. She picked up the check, looked him straight in the eye, and slowly, deliberately tore it into 4 perfect squares. She let the pieces flutter from her fingers onto the floor. I don't want your money, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I want you to leave. Now. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty appeared in his eyes. He had expected tears begging hysterics. He had not expected this cold, defiant strength. It unnerved him. Without another word, he turned and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. "My lawyer is Robert Peterson," he said, his back still to her. "He'll be in touch." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, a sound of profound and irreversible finality. The silence he left behind was a deafening roar. Sophie stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the torn pieces of the cheque at her feet. Her gaze drifted to the open door of the nursery, to the cheerful yellow walls and the empty half-built crib. The scent of paint was no longer joyful. It was suffocating. She sank to her knees, a single guttural sob tearing itself from her chest. Her hands wrapped around the child that the man she loved had just abandoned. The perfect life she had so carefully painted had just been washed away in a storm she never saw coming. The first few days after Ethan left were a blur of disbelieving silence. The apartment, once a cozy haven, transformed into a cavernous, echoing tomb. Every object was a painful reminder. The coffee mug with the chip on the rim that was his. The indentation on his side of the bed. The single stray sock she found under the sofa. Sophie moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the surfaces of a life that was no longer hers. The moving company had been brutally efficient, stripping the apartment of Ethan's presence in under an hour, leaving conspicuous, dust-free rectangles on the bookshelves and empty spaces on the walls where his architectural prints had hung. Reality crashed in, not as a single wave, but as a series of relentless, bone-chilling tides. The first was financial. When she went to pay for groceries, her debit card was declined. A humiliating call to the bank confirmed her fears. The joint account had been cleared out. Ethan had taken everything, leaving only the exact amount of the cheque he'd offered, and she'd torn. Her name wasn't on the lease. It was a corporate apartment rented through Sterling and Finch. An eviction notice, polite but firm, arrived within the week. She had 30 days to vacate. The emotional toll was even greater. Sleep offered no escape, her dreams filled with the cold, dismissive look in Ethan's eyes. She'd wake up gasping for air, her hand flying to her belly. The baby's kicks, a frantic, fluttering reminder of her terrifying new reality. She was going to be a single mother, unemployed, soon to be homeless. Her best friend, Olivia, became her lifeline. A fiercely loyal and pragmatic ER nurse, Olivia showed up the day after Ethan left with 2 large grocery bags and a face like thunder. She didn't offer platitudes or gentle sympathies. She took one look at Sophie's pale, tear-streaked face, pulled her into a bone-crushing hug, and then got to work. "Right," Olivia said, her voice brisk as she began unpacking groceries. "First we eat, then we make a plan. Crying is allowed, but only for 20-minute intervals. After that, we strategize." Sophie, who hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, could only nod numbly. Olivia made her a simple omelette and toast, sitting with her at the small kitchen table while she ate in silence. "Did he say anything else?" Olivia asked gently, her earlier brusqueness softening. Sophie shook her head, pushing a piece of egg around her plate. Just that his lawyer would be in touch. Robert Peterson. Olivia's eyes narrowed. Peterson of Peterson, Klein and Associates. He's a shark, Sophie, a corporate barracuda. Ethan isn't just leaving you, he's preparing for war. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through Sophie. War. She didn't have the energy to get out of bed, let alone fight a legal battle with a high-powered attorney. "What do I do, Liv?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I have nothing. He controlled all the finances. I left my job. My savings are almost gone. This apartment is the first thing we deal with," Olivia finished for her. "You're moving in with me. It's not negotiable. My spare room is a mess, but it's a room. It's safe." The offer was so kind, so simple, that it broke through Sophie's numbness. Fresh tears welled in her eyes, tears of gratitude this time. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm telling," Olivia said firmly. "We've been friends since we were 10 years old and survived Mrs. Davison's chemistry class together. We can survive this asshole. Now finish your eggs." The call from Robert Peterson came 2 days later. His voice was smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. He informed Sophie that Ethan was offering a one-time settlement of $10,000, contingent on her signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and waiving all future claims to spousal or child support. "Child support," Sophie repeated, her voice shaking with rage. "He's waiving his rights to his own son. Mr. Hayes feels it is best to make a clean break," Peterson replied coolly. "He believes a lump sum payment provides you with the immediate resources to start a new life unencumbered by future entanglements." Unencumbered by his own child. The sanitized corporate language made it all the more grotesque. "Tell Mr. Hayes," Sophie said, her voice dripping with ice, "to go to hell." She slammed the phone down, her hand trembling. The bravado lasted for about 5 minutes before the crushing weight of her situation returned. She was turning down $10,000 money she desperately needed out of principle. But what good was principle when you couldn't afford diapers? The lowest point came a week before she was due to move out. She was trying to pack, but the task felt monumental. Every box she filled was an admission of defeat. She sank down onto the floor of the half-dismantled nursery, surrounded by boxes of tiny clothes and unread parenting books. The yellow walls seemed to mock her with their false cheer. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She felt utterly, completely alone. She wasn't just losing a husband. She was losing the entire future she had believed in. She was a failure, a discarded pregnant woman nobody wanted. She curled into a ball, her body racked with sobs, her hands clutching her belly as Leo kicked within, oblivious to his mother's despair. She cried for her lost love, for her unborn son's lost father, and for her own shattered identity. She cried until she had no tears left, leaving her feeling hollowed out, a fragile shell of the woman she used to be. Lying there on the cold wooden floor, surrounded by the ruins of her life, Sophie finally hit rock bottom. The silence of the empty apartment was broken only by her ragged breathing. There was nowhere to go but up. But in that moment, she couldn't even imagine how to stand. The first few weeks at Olivia's apartment were a period of suspended animation. Sophie existed in a fog, moving between the spare room bed and the living room couch. Olivia was a patient, unwavering presence, leaving food for her checking in, but mostly giving her the space to grieve. She handled the logistics of moving Sophie's remaining possessions into a small storage unit, a task for which Sophie was endlessly grateful. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic epiphany, but with a quiet, mundane craving. One dreary afternoon, as rain lashed against the window, Sophie was struck by a sudden, intense desire for her grandmother's lemon and lavender cake. It was a taste from her childhood, a confection of comfort and unconditional love. Her grandmother Eleanor had been a baker, her kitchen a magical place of warmth, sugary air, and gentle wisdom. She had passed away 3 years ago, leaving Sophie with her treasured handwritten recipe book. On a whim, Sophie asked Olivia if she still had the box labelled Kitchen Fragile from the storage unit. Olivia, sensing the first flicker of life in her friend, in weeks retrieved it that evening. Sophie carefully lifted the worn, leather-bound book from the box. Its pages were brittle and stained with vanilla and butter, the familiar cursive script a balm to her soul. She found the recipe, its instructions, intertwined with Eleanor's little notes. Be patient with the zest. That's where the sunshine lives. Olivia's kitchen was small, but it had the basics. Sophie found flour, sugar, eggs. She sent Olivia out for lemons and dried lavender. As she began to measure and mix, something inside her started to shift. The familiar rhythmic actions were meditative. Creaming the butter and sugar, zesting the lemons, folding in the flour, each step was a small, manageable task in a life that felt overwhelmingly chaotic. The simple act of creation was an antidote to the destruction she had endured. As the cake baked, a fragrant, hopeful scent filled the small apartment, chasing away the stale air of despair. When it was done, she drizzled it with a simple glaze and sprinkled lavender buds on top. It looked exactly as she remembered. She and Olivia sat at the tiny kitchen table and each took a bite. The flavor was a revelation, bright, sweet, floral, and deeply comforting. It tasted like sunshine. It tasted like hope. For the first time in over a month, Sophie felt a genuine smile reach her eyes. "It's good," she said, surprised by the simple pleasure of it. "Good," Olivia exclaimed, her mouth full. "Sophie, this is art. This is the best cake I have ever had in my entire life. No exaggeration." That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. But for the first time, it wasn't because of anxiety. An idea, fragile but persistent, had taken root in her mind. What if she could do this? Not just for herself, but as a way to build a life. The next morning, she baked again. A dark chocolate and sea salt tart. Then a batch of oatmeal cookies with cardamom and orange. Olivia took the extras to the hospital, and they were devoured by her colleagues in minutes. Nurses started stopping by their apartment on their way home, pressing cash into Sophie's hand and asking if she had any more of those cookies. A tiny home-based business was born out of Olivia's kitchen. Sophie started an Instagram page, posting simple, beautiful photos of her creations. She called her nascent enterprise Haven and Hearth Confections. The name felt right. She wasn't just selling baked goods. She was selling comfort, a small piece of sanctuary in a chaotic world. Orders started trickling in from friends of friends, then from strangers. She specialized in unique flavor combinations, inspired by her grandmother's book. Things you couldn't find in a typical bakery. Her days took on a new rhythm. She would wake early, bake while the city was still quiet, manage her orders and social media, and rest in the afternoon. The work was demanding, especially in her final weeks of pregnancy, but it was hers. Every dollar she earned, every rave review she received, was a brick in the foundation of her new life. One of her regular customers was a kind, elderly gentleman named Mr. Davies, who lived in the same apartment building. He ordered a small cake every Friday, always paying with a crisp $20 bill and telling her to keep the change. He was a retired accountant with a sharp mind and twinkling eyes. One Friday, as she delivered his weekly rosemary and pear tart, he invited her in for a cup of tea. "Young lady," he said, after they had chatted for a while about her fledgling business, "you have a remarkable product and a tremendous work ethic, but you're thinking too small." Sophie was taken aback. "I'm just trying to make enough to afford diapers, Mr. Davies." "Nonsense," he scoffed gently. An artist should never be content with just selling sketches. You have a brand here, a story. Have you considered a stall at the weekend farmers market or approaching local coffee shops? He then spent an hour talking her through the basics of a business plan, profit margins and scaling. He saw something in her that she hadn't dared to see in herself, not a victim, but an entrepreneur. The conversation with Mr. Davies lit a fire in her. He wasn't just offering advice. He was offering a roadmap. He helped her register her business, apply for a spot at the prestigious City Central Farmers Market, and create a simple, effective budget. He even offered her a small interest-free loan of $2,000 from his own savings to cover the initial setup costs for the market stall, telling her to consider it an old man's investment in a sweeter future. 2 weeks before her due date, Sophie worked her first day at the farmer's market. She was exhausted, her back ached, and she was terrified no one would buy a thing. She sold out in 3 hours. Standing behind her little table, surrounded by the fruits of her labor, making change for a customer, as her baby kicked gently inside her. Sophie felt a profound sense of accomplishment. It was a tiny victory, but it was a start. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building, one cake at a time. Leo was born on a crisp November morning, a healthy, beautiful baby with a tuft of blonde hair and his mother's determined eyes. Holding him in her arms for the first time, Sophie felt a love so fierce and absolute, it eclipsed all the pain that had come before. This tiny, perfect human was her why. He was the reason she had to succeed, the motivation behind every early morning and late night. The first few months were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the constant sweet scent of milk and baking flour. Juggling a newborn and a growing business was the hardest thing Sophie had ever done. She would bake with Leo, sleeping in a sling against her chest, the rhythmic hum of the stand mixer often lulling him to sleep. She learned to type emails with one hand while breastfeeding, to negotiate with suppliers while rocking a fussy baby. Olivia remained her rock, often coming home from a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, and taking Leo so Sophie could have a few precious hours of uninterrupted work or sleep. The farmer's market stall became a local sensation. People lined up for her signature creations, the lemon and lavender cake, the salted caramel and chocolate tart, the Earl Grey shortbread. She had a story that resonated with people, the single mother building a life for her son. A local food blogger wrote a glowing piece titled "The Sweetest Revenge," and suddenly Haven and Hearth Confections was the talk of the town. The income from the market and a few standing orders from coffee shops was enough to get by. But Sophie knew she couldn't operate out of Olivia's tiny kitchen forever. The loan from Mr. Davies had been a godsend, but she needed a real investment to grow. She spent her nights after Leo was asleep, meticulously refining the business plan Mr. Davies had helped her create. She researched commercial kitchen rentals, packaging costs, and potential retail locations. Her big break came from an unexpected source. One of the coffee shops she supplied, the Daily Grind, was a small independent chain with 3 locations. The owner, a savvy businesswoman named Sarah Chen, was impressed not only with Sophie's products, but with her professionalism and drive. "Your stuff flies off the shelves," Sarah told her one afternoon, as Sophie made her weekly delivery, "and your branding is fantastic. People aren't just buying a cookie, they're buying into the Haven and Hearth story. What's your next move?" Sophie, emboldened by weeks of research, took a deep breath. "I want to open my own shop, a small bakery and cafe, a place that feels like a real haven." Sarah listened intently as Sophie laid out her vision. She showed her the business plan, the sales figures from the market, the projected growth. Sarah, who had built her own business from a single coffee cart, recognized the same spark in Sophie. "I know a space," Sarah said, a thoughtful look on her face. "On Hawthorne Avenue. It used to be a bookstore. The rent is high, but the foot traffic is incredible. It would be perfect for you." She paused, then added, "And I know some investors who look for exactly this kind of passion-driven, scalable local business. Let me make a call." The meeting was set for the following week. Sophie was terrified. She bought a new blazer from a consignment shop, created a professional presentation, and arranged for Olivia to watch Leo. She walked into a sleek, intimidating boardroom to pitch her dream to two stone-faced investors friends of Sarah's. She spoke with a passion and clarity that surprised even herself. She didn't just talk about profit margins and customer acquisition. She talked about the feeling of home, the power of comfort, and the legacy she wanted to build for her son. At the end of her presentation, there was a long silence. Then one of the investors, a woman named Catherine Royce, leaned forward. "Ms. Grant," she said, "that was one of the most compelling pitches I've heard all year. We're in." They offered her a seed investment of $75,000 for a minority stake in the company. It was more money than Sophie had ever imagined. She walked out of the building in a daze, the signed term sheet in her hand, feeling heavier and more valuable than gold. Meanwhile, miles away in the sterile luxury of the Zenith Tower, Ethan's life was not the glittering success he had envisioned. Vanessa was beautiful, ambitious, and exciting, but she was also demanding and materialistic. Their power couple life was a performance, a curated series of expensive dinners, charity galas, and Instagram posts. There was a hollowness to it, a transactional quality that left Ethan feeling strangely empty. He thought of Sophie occasionally, usually late at night. He imagined she had probably gone back to her parents' house defeated. He pictured her with the baby, his son, a complication he had successfully excised from his sleek new life. He once saw the food blog article about Haven and Hearth confections on a shared social media feed. He'd scoffed. "Good for her," he'd said to Vanessa, a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Making cupcakes, how quaint." Vanessa had glanced at the article, her perfectly sculpted lips tightening into a thin line. "That's the woman you left?" she'd asked, a hint of something unreadable in her voice. "She seems resourceful." Ethan didn't recognize the woman in the article, smiling confidently behind a table laden with beautiful pastries. The Sophie he had left was broken weeping on the floor of their apartment. This new version was a stranger to him, and a small, unwelcome seed of curiosity was planted in his mind. He dismissed it quickly. He had made his choice. He had chosen power, ambition, and Vanessa. He had everything he ever wanted. Or so he told himself. Back on Hawthorne Avenue, Sophie signed the lease for her new bakery. The space was dusty and smelled of old paper, but it had large front windows and beautiful exposed brick walls. Standing in the middle of the empty room, with Leo cooing in his carrier, she could see at all the glass display cases filled with treats, the small wooden tables where people would gather, the open kitchen where she would create her future. It wasn't a half-painted nursery built on a lie. This was real, and it was all hers. 6 months after securing the investment, Haven and Hearth Bakery opened its doors. The transformation of the old bookstore was breathtaking. Sophie, using her dormant graphic design skills, had created a space that was the physical embodiment of its name, warm, inviting, and stylish. Exposed brick, reclaimed wood, soft lighting, and the irresistible aroma of baking butter and sugar created an atmosphere that was instantly calming. The opening day was a phenomenal success. The line stretched down the block, fueled by the bakery's considerable social media buzz and local press coverage. Sophie, moving between greeting customers and putting the finishing touches on a fresh batch of croissants, felt a joy so pure it almost brought her to tears. Olivia was there, effortlessly managing the cash register, and Mr. Davies sat at a corner table beaming with pride like a proud grandfather. Even Sarah Chen from the Daily Grind stopped by, giving Sophie a knowing, triumphant smile. This was her victory, witnessed by the small village that had helped her build it. The bakery quickly became a beloved neighborhood institution. It was more than just a place to get coffee and a pastry. It was a community hub. Sophie knew her regulars by name. She hired her first 2 employees, a young, aspiring pastry chef and a friendly barista, freeing her up to focus on developing new recipes and managing the business side. She was no longer just a baker. She was a CEO, a boss, a creator of jobs. The success was not lost on Ethan. He drove past the bakery one afternoon on his way to a meeting. He saw the cheerful, professionally designed logo, the crowd of people inside, the warm glow spilling onto the street. He saw Sophie through the window, laughing with a customer looking radiant and confident. She wore a stylish apron over a simple dress, her hair tied back, a pen tucked behind her ear. She looked happy. She looked powerful. It was a jarring image that didn't square with the narrative he had constructed for himself, that of the broken woman he had left behind. The encounter, however, came at a city-sponsored Taste of the Town festival. Haven and Hearth had a prominent booth, and Sophie was personally handing out samples of her new seasonal creation, a spiced pumpkin and maple tart. The line was one of the longest at the event. Suddenly a shadow fell over the counter. Sophie looked up from the customer she was serving, and her smile froze. It was Ethan, and beside him, clinging to his arm, was Vanessa. Vanessa was exactly as Sophie had imagined, flawlessly beautiful, dressed in an impeccably tailored designer suit, her expression one of bored superiority. Ethan looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. "Sophie," he said, his voice strained. "Fancy seeing you here. This is quite the setup." "Ethan," Sophie replied, her voice steady and professional, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside her. She nodded politely at Vanessa. "Welcome to the Haven and Hearth booth. Would you care to try a sample?" The offer threw him off. He had expected an emotional scene, perhaps some lingering bitterness. This cool, detached civility was disarming. Vanessa let out a small, condescending laugh. "We don't really do street food," she said, her eyes sweeping over the booth with disdain. "But it's adorable what you've done, really. Turning a little hobby into all this." The word hobby was laced with poison. Sophie felt a flash of anger but refused to let it show. She simply smiled. "It's certainly more than a hobby. It's my business, my career, and it's doing very well." Ethan shifted his weight, clearly, wanting the interaction to be over. "Well, we should go. We have a reservation at the Clove Club." He named one of the most exclusive and expensive restaurants in the city. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to reassert his status. But before they could leave, a well-known voice boomed from behind them. "Sophie, my dear, these tarts are a triumph, an absolute triumph." It was Walter Sterling, the senior partner of Sterling and Finch, Ethan's ultimate boss, a man of immense influence and a notorious gourmand. He was holding a half-eaten tart, a look of genuine delight on his face. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so glad you like them," Sophie said, her smile genuine now. "Like them, I love them. I want to order 3 dozen, for the firm's client reception on Friday," he declared, pulling out his phone to tap the details in. He then noticed Ethan and Vanessa standing awkwardly to the side. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" Sterling asked, his tone shifting from jovial to professional. "I didn't take you for a man of the people." He then looked from Ethan to Sophie and back again, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Wait a moment. Grant Hayes. You're the one he—" Mr. Sterling, a shrewd and perceptive man, let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. Ethan's face paled. Vanessa's polite smile became a rigid mask. Sophie, seizing the opportunity, extended her hand to the older man. "It's a pleasure to officially meet you, Mr. Sterling. I'm Sophie Grant, and yes, my team and I would be delighted to cater your reception." She had calmly and completely taken control of the situation, networking with her ex-husband's boss, while Ethan stood by, rendered impotent. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. As Mr. Sterling discussed delivery details with Sophie, Ethan grabbed Vanessa's arm and pulled her away, muttering a hasty goodbye. They walked away without looking back, but Sophie could feel their humiliation like a heat wave. Vanessa was furious. "Did you see that? The way he looked at us, the way she acted so smug. You told me she was nobody." "She was nobody," Ethan insisted, but his words lacked conviction. He had just witnessed in stark and public fashion that Sophie was now very much a somebody. She was a respected business owner, a peer of his own boss, and in that moment, in front of the man whose approval he craved most, she had made him feel small and insignificant. The sweet taste of his new life was suddenly unmistakably bitter. The encounter at the festival was a crack in the pristine facade of Ethan and Vanessa's life. For Ethan, seeing Sophie's success firsthand, and the respect she commanded from his own boss, planted a seed of doubt that began to sprout, watered by the growing dissatisfaction in his own life. The intellectual synergy he'd boasted of with Vanessa had revealed itself to be a shared, relentless ambition that left little room for genuine connection or warmth. Their conversations revolved around money, status, and appearances. The Zenith Tower condo felt less like a home and more like a showroom, beautiful but cold, lacking the scent of fresh paint and shared dreams that had once filled his apartment with Sophie. For Vanessa, the incident was a threat. Sophie wasn't supposed to succeed. She was supposed to fade away, a sad footnote in Ethan's past. This thriving, confident version of her was an unwelcome complication, a rival in a game Vanessa was determined to win. Her possessiveness over Ethan intensified her criticisms, becoming sharper, her demands more extravagant. The gilded cage had begun to rattle. The real unraveling, however, began within the walls of Sterling and Finch. Gregory, Ethan's longtime partner at the firm, was a meticulous and cautious architect who had always been slightly wary of Vanessa's aggressive corporate style. He started noticing irregularities in the financial projections for the Langford development, the very project that had brought Vanessa and Ethan together. Figures seemed inflated, and timelines for material acquisitions didn't quite add up. He raised his concerns with Ethan, who, blinded by his infatuation and his desire to impress Vanessa, dismissed them. "You're being overly cautious, Greg," Ethan had said. "Vanessa knows what she's doing. This is how big deals are made." But Gregory couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He began his own quiet investigation, working late into the night, cross-referencing invoices and supplier contracts. What he discovered was a carefully constructed web of deceit. Vanessa had been systematically overbilling the project through a series of shell corporations, funneling the excess funds into an offshore account. The primary supplier she had insisted on using, a company called Apex Innovations, was owned by a man named Simon Reed, Vanessa's former business partner and ex-lover. They were siphoning millions from Sterling and Finch, planning to bleed the project dry and then disappear. Meanwhile, Sophie's catering for the Sterling and Finch reception was a triumph. The firm's wealthiest and most influential clients raved about the sophisticated pastries and impeccable service. Walter Sterling was so impressed that he offered Haven and Hearth a permanent corporate contract to supply all their client meetings and events. It was a massive, game-changing deal for Sophie's business. The irony was not lost on her. The firm that had enabled her husband to discard her was now becoming her biggest client. One evening, desperate and seeing the walls closing in, Gregory went to the one person he felt he could trust to be discreet and who had a vested interest in the truth, Sophie. He found her at the bakery long after closing, sweeping the floor, while Leo slept in his stroller in the corner. He laid out his evidence on one of the cafe table's bank statements, falsified invoices, corporate records, linking Vanessa to Simon Reed. "I know this is a lot to ask," Gregory said, his voice heavy with stress. "But Ethan won't listen to me. He's been completely snowed. This is going to destroy him, and it could ruin the firm. You're the only one who ever seemed to be able to get through to him." Sophie looked at the documents, her heart pounding. It was worse than she could have imagined. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a calculated criminal conspiracy. She felt a strange, detached pity for Ethan. He had thrown away his family for a woman who was using him as a pawn in a multi-million-dollar heist. A week later, Ethan showed up at Sophie's apartment door, the one she now rented in a quiet, respectable building 2 blocks from her bakery. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt with dark circles under his eyes. His expensive suit was wrinkled. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sophie hesitated, then stepped aside. Her small apartment was filled with the signs of her new life. Leo's toys scattered on the rug, sketches for new cake designs on the coffee table, the lingering scent of vanilla. "Vanessa left," he said, sinking onto her sofa without being invited. "She's gone, cleared out the accounts, took everything. Gregory presented his findings to Sterling this morning. There's going to be a full-scale investigation. I'm going to be ruined, Sophie. My career is over." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "A terrible, unforgivable mistake. She was a fantasy, a mirage. You and Leo, you're my reality. You were always my reality. I was just too stupid to see it." He reached for her hand. "Please, Sophie, let me come home. I can fix this. We can fix this. For Leo. For us." Sophie looked at the man before her. The arrogant, cold stranger from that rainy October night was gone, replaced by a broken, desperate shell. For a fleeting moment, she felt a pang of the old love, the memory of the life they were supposed to have. But then she looked past him at the life she had built on her own. She thought of the terror and the tears, the lonely nights, the back-breaking work. She thought of Olivia's unwavering support, Mr. Davies's quiet faith in her, and the pride she felt every time she turned the key in the door of her own bakery. She gently pulled her hand away. "There is no home for you to come back to, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but unshakable. "You burned that house down, and you're not welcome in the one I built from the ashes." She saw the last glimmer of hope die in his eyes. He had come to her expecting absolution, a soft place to land. He had fundamentally misunderstood the woman she had become. She was not his backup plan. She was not a harbor in his storm. "I need you to leave now, Ethan," she said, walking to the door and opening it. He stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and despair. He finally understood. He hadn't just lost Vanessa and his career. He had lost Sophie completely and irrevocably. He stumbled out of the apartment and into the hallway, a man who had traded a treasure for a handful of glittering dust and was now left with nothing. The fallout from Vanessa and Simon's scheme was swift and brutal. The ensuing scandal ripped through the city's financial and architectural circles. Sterling and Finch managed to survive, but its reputation was deeply tarnished. Ethan, as the senior associate who had championed Vanessa and signed off on her fraudulent projects, became the primary scapegoat. Though cleared of criminal complicity, he was professionally disgraced. Fired from the firm and blackballed in the industry, his career was over. The Zenith Tower condo was seized as part of the asset recovery, and he was left with a mountain of legal debt and the wreckage of his ambition. Vanessa and Simon were never apprehended. They had vanished, leaving a cold trail that ended somewhere in the Caribbean. Ethan tried to contact Sophie a few more times, pathetic rambling voicemails left in the middle of the night. She never answered. She had instructed her lawyer to handle all communication regarding child support, which Ethan, now working a low-wage job in retail logistics, was ordered by the court to pay. The meager monthly checks were a pittance compared to the bakery's profits, but Sophie insisted he pay them. It wasn't about the money. It was about forcing him to acknowledge the one responsibility he couldn't escape. Sophie, in contrast, was thriving. Haven and Hearth Bakery became a runaway success story. The corporate contract with Sterling and Finch led to others. Within 2 years of opening, she launched a second, larger location in the city's bustling financial district. She was featured in national magazines, not as a victim, but as an inspiring entrepreneur. Her story of turning personal devastation into professional triumph resonated with thousands. She became a sought-after speaker at business conferences for women. Her message always the same: your greatest strength is often forged in your deepest pain. She never sought revenge on Ethan. She didn't need to. Her success was not a reaction to his failure. It was a testament to her own strength, creativity, and resilience. She had built a life so full and joyful that he had become a footnote, a hazy memory from a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her world was rich and vibrant. It was filled with the laughter of her son Leo, who was now a happy, rambunctious toddler. It was filled with the loyal friendship of Olivia, who was Leo's godmother and Sophie's ever-present reality check. It was filled with the quiet wisdom of Mr. Davies, who served as the chairman on her company's advisory board and took immense joy in Leo's weekly visits. Her life was filled with the satisfaction of her work, the camaraderie of her growing team of employees, and the quiet moments of peace in her own home, a place she had secured through her own hard work. One sunny afternoon, about 3 years after he had left Sophie, was in Westwood Park with Leo pushing him on the swings. He was squealing with delight, his little legs kicking towards the sky. She was watching him. Her heart so full of love, it felt like it might burst when she saw a familiar figure on a nearby bench. It was Ethan. He looked older than his years, worn down by life. He was thin, dressed in nondescript clothes, and stared blankly at the ground. He hadn't seen her. He was just a man on a park bench, anonymous and defeated. The powerful, arrogant man who had shattered her world was gone, replaced by this sad, empty stranger. Sophie felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no lingering affection. just a profound sense of distance. He was a character from a book she had read a long time ago, whose story had no bearing on her own. She stopped the swing and lifted a giggling Leo into her arms, burying her face in his soft hair, inhaling the sweet scent of her son, her life, her future. Without a backward glance at the man on the bench, she turned and walked away towards the sunshine. She was not a woman who had been abandoned. She was a woman who had been liberated. She had lost a husband, but had found herself. And in the end, she had built her own kingdom, not as a spurned wife, but as a queen on her own throne, reigning over a life more wonderful than any she had ever dared to paint on a nursery wall. Sophie's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the end of one road is simply the beginning of a grander highway. Betrayal and heartbreak can feel like the end of the world, but they can also be the fire that forges us into something stronger, more resilient, and more truly ourselves. She didn't let another person's betrayal define her future. She picked up the broken pieces and built an empire that was entirely her own. Have you ever faced a moment that felt like the end, only to find a new beginning? Have you discovered a strength you never knew you had when pushed to your absolute limit? Share your own stories of resilience and reinvention in the comments below. We draw strength from one another. If this story of triumph over adversity moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and empower. Your support helps us continue to share these important narratives.